Must be strange kind of seeing a lady up here during your divine service time. It's no. Yes, Pastor Jimmy, was due to preach today, and he had a family commitment back in South Africa, and so some of you may have heard that he jet-setted off Tuesday, and so he'll be back on Friday, and he sends his greetings to everybody. 15 years ago, Jimmy and I started our journey at Helderberg College. First years, Jimmy in theology, and I studied in childcare, and 10 years later, 15 years later, his younger brother is now graduating from the ministry as well. And for some of you that don't quite know the background to this, Jimmy, my husband, obviously the pastor of the church, he's one of 4 children, and he was in the Air Force, and that's where he learned to know God and joined the Seventh-day Adventist faith. And at that point, he was the only one in his family. And his younger brother kind of dibbled and dabbled and started looking into the faith as well as his younger sister. But for a long time, nobody else kind of decided anything, and they just looked at him as if he was some crazy person. And then his younger brother gave his life to God and was also in the Air Force, and then was made redundant or left the Air Force, and also went to go study in the ministry, kind of following in his brother's footsteps. So it's an emotional and proud moment for Jimmy, and that's why he's not here today. So I'm kind of here to share a story with you, and I'm not qualified, but I'm hoping that the story that I'm to share with you and the message that I have will bring some meaning to your own lives. We read in Jeremiah chapter 29, God says he knows what he's doing and that he's got it all planned out. "17 years ago, going on 18, Jimmy and I got married. Coming up in January will be our anniversary. And like any young couple, you have these dreams, you've got these ambitions of what your life and your journey is going to be. You know, going into the ministry as a young couple, serving God, the idea of having a family, you know, and as the years go by, you can see the Lord working, your ministry is building, you know, things are going nicely. But there's certain other things that don't quite seem to work out. And the plans that we had expected and the plans that we had hoped for suddenly became dashed. The whole idea of having a family. And so you're kind of stuck in a situation where you are praying to God and you're saying, well, God, you're saying you've got all these plans for me. You've got it all sorted out. But it's not working out the way I want it to work out. And so you kind of live in a bit of a limbo land, going toing and froing with God. And we'll leave it there for a moment. Going back to the idea of weddings. If we turn to the book of John chapter 2. We find a story that John tells and relates to us of Jesus. So John chapter 2, from verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding about 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till last." This, the first of Jesus' miraculous signs performed in Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, when we were planning our wedding, and as any lady can relate, there's some sort of stress that's involved in planning a wedding. And back home in South Africa, we did it in a more traditional way. My father paid for the wedding, and so in that respect, we had to work on a budget. And with that, you always had to communicate with your mom and dad to say, "Is this going to be okay? Is this within the budget?" You know? And so I decided, okay, I'm an organized person. Well, I like to think I am. So I bought a bride-to-be wedding guide, you know, how to plan the perfect wedding. And in this guide, it helped you plan sort of like a year to 2 years in advance. And so it said, you know, just to keep the nerves calm, you do this, you start planning how many guests you want, and then you do your checklist, and then you send out your invitations, and then you organize the caterers, and so it goes on. And it also split the responsibilities. So it said, right, so the bride organizes this, and the groom is to organize this. And it stated in this book that the bridegroom, or Jimmy, was supposed to organize the grape juice or the wine for the toasts. So I thought this was a good idea, and duly delegated this to him. So we were still at Helderberg College, which is in the Western Cape of South Africa. And it is surrounded by beautiful winelands or vineyards. You know, it's almost like the wine capital of South Africa. So with that in mind, I thought, right, you know, we're going to get some really good tasting grape juice. And so I left it to him. And then closer to the wedding, I kind of asked him, you know, have you done anything about the grape juice? Yeah, yes and no. So it's like, okay, stress, 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 stress. He, obviously on a budget, and him being a student, paying for his own way through college, didn't really have the funds to go out to a wine farm and go and buy expensive grape juice. So he ended up going to the local farm stall on the college campus. And they were selling sort of like crates or cases of grape juice in cans. It's just a true story. And so he ordered, I'm not too sure if it was maybe 5 or 6 sort of cases of these cans of grape juice, and bought them. And then he said, right, we're sorted. So I said, well, how are we going to use cans of grape juice at the wedding? He says, no, you just decant everything into jugs and then you put it in. So you can imagine some of the little arguments we had back then already. So planning a wedding, and especially weddings in Bible times, were seen as big deals. And I'm sure there's more qualified people in this room that know a bit more about biblical history than what I do. But from what I've learned, weddings back in Bible times were one of the major events. And it was huge. So everybody almost was invited. And it was where there was almost no skimping. Every effort was made to make sure there was the best. And one of the ways that you could know whether it was a good wedding was, of course, with the drink. And so this is how we find our story in John chapter 2. And we find this couple sitting with a dilemma which maybe they didn't quite realize at first, because they're oblivious. They're caught up in the festivities. Everybody's there. The plans that they had for their wedding, for their special day, suddenly runs a bit of a snag. And we find that with the start of this new life, something goes wrong. And what do you do about it? And as we see, Jesus' mother is invited, and Jesus. So we have to assume that the couple that have gotten married is either a relative or someone that is extremely close to Jesus and Mary. Now, like this couple, they reached this point in their celebration of life together where something that was extremely important to them suddenly sort of shone a bad light. And they decided, well, they didn't decide, they kind of were in that limbo land. What are we to do? What are we to do with our guests? What's everybody expecting? And so when I read this passage and when I've read Jeremiah, it kind of spoke to me in my personal life and what we've been going through. And I figured out that there's 4 encouragements that can come from this story, which I'd like to share with you. And the first one is We'll get the little thing up. While it's coming. The first one is to look at the time. We'll look at the clock. All right? What's going on? What is the event that is going on in your life? How much time is being consumed by this problem? Is it something that you are obsessing about? Is it maybe something that you've just built your whole life on and then suddenly you find that it's empty? Maybe it's a situation where you have had a good job and suddenly you're made redundant. Is it a relationship that's gone bad? What is the time? What's the situation? Second thing is to look at the guest list. Who is involved in your life? Who have you invited into this situation? Is Jesus the first on your guest list? Or have you tried to solve this on your own? For me, the idea of having a family became an obsession. And it's been going on for a good on 15 years. And it reached a point in the last 4 years where that was everything that I lived for. And for those that already have families, you don't quite just give it a second thought. And for those that don't have families, maybe it's something you have thought about but have just decided it's maybe not for you, or there may be something else that's come along your way. But for when it's something that you have really, really wanted and you don't or not able to get it, it really takes up a lot of your time, a lot of your thoughts. So I was forced to kind of step back, because going through all of this, it started affecting my health. And for those that may not have known, I kind of not broke out, but I developed a skin condition. And it became something that was embarrassing, to say the least. And when you are so consumed with something else, it takes over your life. It takes over your body, and your body reacts. And so you need to look at the time. You need to look at the guest list. Who is involved? Who's invited into your life? Have you actually gone to God first? And you say, well, yes, Cedrene, did you go to God? Well, yes, I've been struggling with him for 15 years. And then we'll say, oh, did you not listen to him? Well, yes, I did listen to him. I had to move on to the third point. I had to be honest in my current situation. I had to accept. And when you accept what the situation is that you're involved in, you can then move on. When you accept your current situation, you realize that the people on your guest list are the most important. In the story, we knew that Jesus was on the guest list. We knew the situation. We knew what time it was. It was a major event in this young couple's life. And they accepted the situation. And then, once they accepted their current situation, they consulted a specialist. That's the fourth thing. So we read in the story, Mary goes to Jesus and she says, they've run out of wine. And in different translations, it may say something different. I think in the King James, does it just say woman? Yeah? Yes, and it sounds quite abrupt, doesn't it? So I did a little bit of digging, and just on the off cuff, the New International says, dear woman, of course. Now, the commentaries like to explain that when Jesus said it in that way to his mother, it was no disrespect intended. Jesus knew, and his mother knew, that although he was her son, his purpose was different. And so when he said woman, he meant it with the utmost respect. So she goes to Jesus and makes it known. They've run out of this wine. They've run out of drink. What are we to do? And so Jesus obviously says, well, it's not my business. And then Mary goes to the servants and she says to them, do whatever he says to do. Both Mary and the servants, whether we like to believe it or not, exercised faith. The servants heard Jesus tell them, well, take these 6 jars. They're empty, and that's why I brought these little ornaments here. I'm a very visual person, and so I like to kind of visualize what they were talking about. Now, I know this is not identical to what they would have back in Bible times, but you can imagine these empty jars, clay jars, standing there that were used for ceremonial purposes. And Jesus says to the disciples, go and fill them with water. And it obviously says how much these jars could contain. And if you multiply that amount per jar by the 6, it gives you an indication of how many guests there were. For us at our wedding, we only had 200 guests. And we budgeted on those little cans, you could get at least 2 people's little glasses out of one can. And yet, they had 6 jars. The kids are over there, but I brought this to kind of demonstrate the whole miracle. And so the servants go, they bring the jars filled with water, and then Jesus takes it. And before their eyes, it changes into wine. And he takes it and he says, go give this to the bridegroom. Or to the master of the banquet. And the master of the banquet takes a sip, and he obviously is shocked by the taste and discovers that they've actually saved the best for last. And of course, then the bridegroom is introduced to this whole situation, and he is probably more surprised than ever. Faith is not about knowing it's all figured out. It's about knowing God is going to do. When Mary went to Jesus, she had faith that he was going to do something. She didn't know what he was going to do, but she knew he was going to do something. The answer to our own emptiness, our own situation, may not come immediately. Sometimes it takes 15 years to come. Jesus asks us to take that faith, as he said in Jeremiah. He's interested in you. He's interested in me. He took the time to think about a couple at their wedding day. He took the time to create the excellent wine for their wedding. He's taken the time to think of each one of us when he died on the cross. We need to have the faith that God is going to do something in our lives, no matter how long it takes. I got an email last night from Pastor Bernie. I've accepted the role for the Scottish Mission as the new children's ministry sponsor. I may not be able to have my own family, but I'm trusting, I'm having faith in God that he'll give me a wider family. So I'd leave this with you. Above all powers, above all things, he took the time and thought of you above all. Amen. Amen. Please bow your heads. Allow us to have faith, dear Father. Faith in that you will do something in our lives. You have the plans and you will make it happen. Maybe not in the way that we think, and maybe not in the way that we will, but in the way that is best for us. Amen.